we've done a lot of things right over the years, but we have also learned a lot. And I think the way we approached it in the start was a bit too extreme for many of the athletes. So Kristian said it's the egg philosophy. So you take the whole basket of eggs and just throw it at the wall, and then see who doesn't crack.
You weeded out a lot of people early. So how many are there of you now on the team?
From the start, we are 4.
Yeah, so we haven't, compared to like bigger nation, we haven't burned through too many, really.
But we had quite a few dropouts way in the start because, the volume was a bit high and a lot of injuries. And
But that's also because we didn't have any qualification standards. It was more like we'll open up the door. So everyone who wants to come in, like if we're just thinking about triathlon, you could come in and be a part of the first camp that we had. So I think it's also down to that.
Back then, I went there with my brother, and one of the main guys in Triathlon Norway, he said, those Iden brothers, they will never learn how to swim. They will never become anything. He have said that he regret those words, and he's a really cool dude, but it's a bit funny looking back now.
Yeah, the ultimate revenge you've had on that.
But he didn't actually say it to me though, so that's good.
Right.
Alrighty guys, a very warm welcome to the video. So that was a podcast which I'd reported on earlier with another clip from Rich Roll, which he posted a few weeks back. It was in the days after the Kona 2022 Ironman World Championships with Gustav Iden and Kristian Blummenfelt. And I will link the link to the full podcast in the description because, again, this is only a short snippet of Rich Roll's work. This is not my work. And I think that it really deserves a watch. However, this was lessons from Kona, lessons from the Norwegian train Rain, Rich Roll podcast. And essentially the first clip you've seen there was Gustav, and with some input from Blummenfelt talking about the early, philosophy of the Norwegian training protocols, where they were at quite a young age and they had a bunch of athletes and they lost a fair few of them, particularly with this egg against the wall or eggs against the wall philosophy, whereby, you treat these up and coming athletes like they're eggs sitting in a crate, and you throw the whole crate of all eggs against the wall and you see which ones break and which ones don't. The ones that don't break, well, they're going to be the champions, right? And it speaks to the cutthroat nature of professional sports. But I also think, obviously this is going back some years now, and most people realize this is quite an outdated approach. But I think it's important to kind of unpack it a little bit in terms of, when athletes are all at a particular age, there are so many factors which determine their potential long-term trajectory and long-term outcomes with respect to their sporting ability. And this is highlighted particularly with respect to genetics, individual levels of development, the impacts of training protocols on things like biomarkers in the blood, hormone levels, other factors, and even just taking into account the fact that, some kids or young adults will be going through a lot more in their lives with respect to socially, with respect to financially, educationally, family issues, all different kinds of things. And we really can't treat each athlete in and of themselves the same as everyone else. If we look back at the past Kona winners before these two guys kind of burst onto the scene in terms of Ironman, so obviously Kristian Blummenfelt won the 2021 Ironman World Championships, which was in St. George because Kona wasn't an option due to the pandemic. However, Gustav then went on to win in the same year the 2022 Ironman World Championships in Kona, and these guys are in their 20s, mid to late 20s. So if we, though, however, go back and look at the past Kona winners all the way back to 2010, the early 2000 teens, and all the way up to basically 2020, the likes of Chris McCormack, Craig Alexander, these guys had quite a good reign, winning at multiple consecutive years in a row concurrently. And, Chris McCormack won it in his early 30s to mid 30s. Craig Alexander, again, mid-30s to even late 30s. Then we look at the likes of Jan Frodeno, winning it in his mid to late 30s, multiple occasions. Patrick Lange, early 30s. You know, the average age of these Kona winners is in the 30s. And so if you're going to treat, you know, a young 18-year-old athlete, so not harshly, but if you're going to throw them against the wall and see if they crack, is that really the best approach to optimizing their potential? For some athletes, of course, they won't crack and they'll go on to become champions. Obviously, Gustav and Kristian have not cracked and they've gone on to become champions. But I think that everyone's going to develop at different levels, and your level or ability to withstand training load at a young age, I guess this is the main thing, doesn't always determine your long-term potential in a sport, particularly a sport like Ironman that does reward, obviously not the last two winners, you know, late 20s or even mid to late 20s. However, it does reward experience, and it rewards endurance. And, you know, it's almost like the Tour de France. Most Tour de France winners, apart from the last few years, going back over the years, were in their 30s. You know, it was very rare to see someone early 20s, for example, winning the Tour de France. That's changed, and obviously things are changing. However, I think that nurturing athletes is very important. And, you know, you can take different levels of development. Let's look at controversial figure, Lance Armstrong, right? But regardless of all that, look at him at 15 years old. He had the body of a 25-year-old man, you know. So he was leaps and bounds in terms of development physically, from a physical maturity perspective, than most 15-year-old athletes. And he was mixing it in his early days in triathlon with the likes of Mark Allen and all that. Obviously not in the run, but getting off the bike onto the run, right up there with the best. So he was leaps and bounds above average people his age in terms of his physical maturity and genetics at that point. But that doesn't mean that someone who's a lot less physically mature and as a kind of consequence of that, unable to withstand the training volume, the training intensity, and the demands, even from a mental perspective, that, for example, someone who's more physically mature at a younger age could. That doesn't mean that the less mature athlete at that age wouldn't go on to become a champion in the later years. And so if you're throwing them against the wall and seeing if they break, and you break them, for example, they get burnt out, they get chronic fatigue, exhaustion, just mentally over it, or injured, you're essentially not, I guess you're limiting their capacity, of course, because then, you know, in the sport, because then they're going to give up the sport and go on to something else. But you're also really kind of denying even yourself as a coach the opportunity to really see their full potential and to nurture them and develop them into champion athletes. Now, obviously, I guess like anything in life, really, you know, triathlon is cutthroat, endurance is cutthroat, cycling, running, swimming, it's all cutthroat. Top level sports are cutthroat. Coaches need to show that their athletes are performing in order to hold their jobs under a particular, you know, nation program or national program. And, you know, it's just the unfortunate reality. And I think that whilst we'd kind of like to think that it's changing, I think the knowledge of it's changing, but the practices probably, you know, still, I guess, of that mindset of, you know, throwing creative eggs against the wall. The ones that don't break, they're the champions. And I see the philosophy, and I understand it, as cutthroat and as brutal as it is. But I think in reality, it kind of undermines the potential of lesser developed athletes at an early age who may well have the genetic potential to go on and be champions in the early, mid, late 30s. So I think it's just an interesting discussion, and one thing to keep in mind with respect to anyone who's aspiring to be good or to pursue a career in sports, but even just age groupers or anyone who enjoys training, realize that everyone has a different path, everyone has different genetics, everyone can tolerate different levels of stress at different aspects of their life and their kind of development milestones or process of development, so physically and mentally. So important to keep in mind that if you're not the best athlete when you're younger, it doesn't mean that you don't have the potential to be a fantastic athlete when you're older. But an important discussion, or an interesting discussion, I should say, nonetheless. And I'll leave it at that, but I'll play another clip earlier on from the podcast talking about Gustav in his early days of triathlon and cycling, and then Kristian when they were training from a young age and their mindset, because I think that's very insightful as well. But nonetheless, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. Again, this is the work of Rich Roll, so I will link his full podcast, and I do encourage everyone really to go and have a look at it, because it's definitely a great insight into the minds of champion athletes. So take care, enjoy this next little clip, and I'll see you in the next one.
Right. All right. So you guys are known as the Norwegian train. Everybody is fascinated by what's happening in Bergen. I'm going to talk to Olav after I talk to you guys, and we can dive into the science. But I think people are fascinated by and interested in like what it is that you guys are doing that's different. Like, why are you so good? Why are you so fast? So can we talk a little bit about your approach to training and what has distinguished you guys from what everyone else is doing?
I think it's people talk like what's in the water in Bergen or something, but I think it is slightly random that we have that many good athletes from Bergen, but it's definitely a culture thing. So me and Kristian, we have been basically in Overtraining for 15 years.
Yeah, like you guys were like 13 years old, right?
At a high level. So even before that, we did a lot of training, but we have been. Well, I see myself as a professional since I was basically 14 years old. I was training better than some pros do today. So I think it's been a lot of volume, high quality training for many, many, many years that has made us into the athletes we are today. And it's not some, I don't know, higher power.
And I guess we've also been living in this bubble, like within the group, and not just looking at what everyone else is doing. But we like, if we want to catch up, we have to be more extreme. We have to train more. We have to take it like one step further in every part of the sport. And I think also the fact that we've been like in that bubble has really helped us to, just accelerate.
Right. Kind of being these outliers, outsiders. Nobody's really paying attention to what you're doing. And you could kind of go deep when the stakes were low and there were no expectations, and find a certain kind of groove that ultimately is paying dividends. I mean, this is like over 10 years in the making,
and also no history in the sport. So because we had no history, we had to make the pathway ourselves. So we haven't just been following someone.
And if you're known for being the ones who train the best, the ones who train the most extreme, it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. So since everyone's saying is, you're training the best, you're smartest, so scientific, you kind of grow into that even more. And that makes you think, okay, we have to do everything more scientific. So it's for sure, it's good to be known to be good, because then you think you're good as self. So I think it's something about that as well.
Well, I see it as a confluence of all of these factors that you couldn't have predicted. Like you come from a cycling background originally, right? And Kristian, you come from swimming.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, no, I can believe it. At a time when Norway hadn't put anybody on a triathlon Olympic team for I don't know how long, ever maybe. Had there been never before. But suddenly you have an interest in Norway for truly developing a professional approach to the sport with what was his name? Arid Tveiten? Yeah. I'm never going to pronounce that right. And who came into the picture around 2011, and then with Olav entering around 2015, 16, observing what was going on at the Rio Olympics, and then bringing a whole level of new professionalism and science into the approach. So it's like these individuals who kind of come together with athletes like yourself and Casper, of course, who are highly motivated and willing to go all in. Like without any one of those elements, none of this happens. So it's kind of a really special thing. I think of it as sort of like Bergen and triathlon is not dissimilar culturally from like what was happening with grunge music in Seattle in the 90s. Like it's like a special place where there's an energy and a focus that, ultimately over time, ripples out and creates something really cool and unique.
And I think also the fact that when we started so young, we had this 10 years vision within the team.
Uh-huh.
So when we were 16, 17, it wasn't just that we should be winning the Junior World Championship the next year or getting into the next World Cup. We did think like 10 years ahead, and we had that support and believe and understanding that it's like a long journey
right.
we're having ahead of us when we started back in 2010, 2011. And I think we got support from the Olympic team even in 2014, and not just for Paris, I mean for Rio, or not just for Tokyo, but also for Paris back in 10 years ahead. And that long-term vision, I think, has been good to have like behind us.
It's so important, that long-term view. Like, we're not going to be, world champions overnight. We're going to look at this in 10-year blocks, and we're thinking way, way down the line. Like, for anybody who's trying to achieve any kind of goal, like having that kind of lens and, building the foundation and the consistency over a huge period of time. I mean, that's truly how you achieve outrageous, audacious results.